it really just, it stunned me. It really stunned me. And as I was going through and seeing, it made me realize that I was also an indirect victim. And it made me feel so embarrassed and ashamed. Not because of the money that I was about, but because, one, I felt like I was, felt used and betrayed. And I felt like these guys were going to set me up as the mark to take the fall for everything. And I had no one, if I can be honest with you, I had no one that I could really turn to and talk to at this time. And I felt so alone. I felt so ashamed. I was so embarrassed. I was so humiliated by the whole thing. And just being associated with it, I felt so dirty.
Welcome to the Modern Sense Podcast, your financial-friendly podcast navigating the ever-evolving world of personal finance. Join me, Andrea Thompson, for insightful interviews and non-traditional perspectives on modern finance. Let's redefine the way we think about money together. Today, my guest is Elias Ben Khalifa, a seasoned real estate broker and managing partner at Olea & Co. Elias brings us a deeply personal story which has redefined his approach to his career and shaped who he is as an individual. Elias, thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure, Andrea. Thank you for having me. And it's really exciting to be a part of the Modern Sense podcast with you.
Oh, thanks. I really do appreciate that. And I think that, your story is one that is, first of all, very impactful. And I'm very excited to share it with our audience today. So to set the table for what we're going to be discussing, Elias is going to share a very deeply personal story today, not only with the victories, but also the challenges that he's faced along his journey. From those heights of success to the depths of financial ruin, Elias's story is one of resilience and redemption. We delve into your early experiences as an up-and-coming realtor, where you found yourself thrust into a management role, growing a successful team through turbulent times in the aftermath of the great financial crisis. But it wasn't just professional challenges that you faced. You also encountered betrayal and devastating financial loss. Your story is one of transformation. You found the strength to rebuild your life, draw on the support of loved ones, and channel your experiences into advocacy. And today, together, we're going to explore the importance of consumer education, shedding light on the pitfalls, and offering guidance to those navigating complex financial decisions. And that's just the beginning. So with all that being said, Elias, welcome to the Modern Sense podcast.
Thank you.
First of all, tell
me.
us, of course, I would love to hear a little bit about yourself. You're now a practicing and successful realtor. What does a typical day look like for you?
Well, usually my day will start at around 5 a.m. I typically get up nice and early, and I try to get some type of mindset, some type of a mindset routine in place. So I like to read. Usually I'll get my reading done, usually in the first half an hour of me waking up. And then I'll do a bit of, just some visualization exercises as well, just working on mindset, getting myself mentally prepared for tackling the day's challenges. I quickly take a look at what my top priorities are for that day as well. And then by 6 o'clock, I'm trying to get into the gym, try to get a workout in, whether it's a run on the treadmill or some weights, just something to get the blood flowing. And then usually by 7:30, I've already kind of tackled a good chunk of that and walking the dogs. And then I usually do my very best to get into the office by 9 a.m. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but I try to be fluid when it comes to that. And then once I'm in the office, usually the mornings are spent connecting with past clients, my network, connecting with existing clients, getting them up to speed with where they're, with the activity of our listings that we have for them, getting them, or if they're buyers, just keeping them informed with what's happening with the market. I also manage a mortgage and finance team as well. So we also have a mortgage and finance division. So I spend some time as well connecting with my mortgage agents, making sure that they have all of the support that they need, making sure that the business is continuing to grow and move forward in the right direction. And so that's typically the morning. By the afternoon, I'm usually out on the road. I will use the time to go and meet with potential clients as well, listing appointments, Showings are typically done in the early evenings, late afternoons as well, depending on the day. And also preparation of any offers. If we have a listing where we're receiving offers, we're getting those ready. Another thing that I'll do, if we have listings that are active, I'll also go and research the properties that are competing, let's call them competing listings that are in the area, comparable homes that may be in line or, may be used in comparison with our home. So I like to be able to speak to the real estate that's out there. So those are things that I'll typically pack into my day. And then depending on how the afternoon, evening plays out with the activities or tasks that we're dealing with, sometimes my evening will end at like 7, 8 p.m. Other times it'll roll until 11:30, midnight. It's very fluid. So,
wow.
And then you kind of pass out eventually sometime between midnight and 1 a.m. And then you wake up and do it all over again.
I'm tired listening to that. You have a very jam-packed day. It is a lot. And you must be a morning person to be able to get up at 5 and start your practice. So, good on you. That's incredible. And, I'm sure that morning routine also helps to, set the table for the rest of that very busy and productive day.
It really does. And I'll be honest with you, Andrea, I was never a morning person to begin with. It was something that was born out of necessity. As my business grew and evolved, as I became a lot more involved in terms of not only building a sales pipeline, but now also managing and supporting other real estate mortgage professionals, there was just so much going on. And I also had an obligation to those that relied on me for that support. I also needed to be at my very best. So I needed to make some adjustments in my life to make it work. And thankfully, it's all worked for the better. I'm really glad that I've become a morning person. So
it definitely adds to the day. I can agree. I have kids 100%. And it's a forcing function sometimes. Well, let's take it back a little bit though. So you're now a successful realtor. You also run a mortgage business within that. But let's go back to the beginning of your story. So how did you become initially interested in realty, and tell us a little bit about the origin of your career?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was always, as a young kid, I was always fascinated with architecture, real estate, things like that. My father also designed and built a villa in the Mediterranean for our family. And so his obsession with architecture and design kind of manifested in me. So I also started to get a real interest in it, from things going back to like historic architecture, whether it's from like Punic Roman era, Roman Empire times, all the way to like what you see now, like with the postmodern and some of the more modern architectural design elements. It's really something that's captivated me. I've always been interested by the design and just seeing the evolution of architecture over the years. And I've always been fascinated by it. And the engineering as well behind it as well. Like when you look at some of the stuff, which explains why at first I never did go follow the path of real estate. I actually ended up going into engineering. I graduated with a computer engineering degree. Yeah, it's again, just following a path that allows me to, obviously make my parents happy. It was something that they were very, they were very keen on. They really wanted to see me go down that path. And of course, when you're young and impressionable, I was still kind of undecided with what my life journey was like at the time. I was still very young. And so I ended up just kind of following what they suggested. And thankfully, it paid for itself. I was able to also work during the time that I was studying. So I never had to take OSAP or anything like that. So I've always had that work ethic instilled in me ever since I was like 15 years old. And thankfully now translating all these years later. So going back to how I got into the real estate business, it's important to note that, obviously my background was where I was actually working in a corporate head office for a national business retailer. And I was working in their computer technology division as a buyer. And I was buying computer hardware parts for the warranty and extended warranty repair division. So for all of the in-house computer technicians that were doing repairs to computers, laptops that were being sold by this retailer, I was involved. I was responsible for replenishing the hardware. So whether they're motherboards, hard drives, monitors, all of that stuff. And I was there for a number of years. And during that time, I was training new employees that were joining, and I was finding that they were getting passed over. I was getting passed over for promotions by people that I was bringing on, and like people that were coming on, I would train, kind of get up to speed, and then they would move on, and I was still kind of stuck in the role that I was. And I shouldn't say the nail, but the driver, the real driver that pushed me into getting my real estate license actually, and I always thank him. I always thank my boss for this. I'm not angry in any way, shape, or form. I'm grateful that he reacted the way that he did. I went in for a performance review, and at the time, he was telling me how amazing I was doing. He was going through my metrics. The corporate reviews are all like automated. They follow certain models, and based on the criteria, I was coming up where I was either meeting or exceeding the criteria of my role. And when it came time to now bring up my compensation, or at least the increase in my compensation, I think it was so small, but enough to push me into a new tax bracket. And that wasn't what drove me. It was his presentation of that. So at the time, like this is going back to like 2006, 2007, I was making, I think I was making like $40,000 or $45,000 a year. And when it was time to bring up my increase, I think it was like $1,500 for the whole year. And that was one thing, but it was his reaction. It looked like he was really trying not to laugh. He felt embarrassed for me to share with me that note. And I remember it was like at 9:30 in the morning when we did our review. And when he said that to me, and just the look on his face, how he was trying not to laugh at that increase, it just flipped the switch. And as soon as that presentation was done, I went back to my desk. I did all my work. I went to lunch. I took my lunch break, did my work. And in the corporate environment, I think the end of the business day was like at 4:30. I was typically leaving at 5:36. On that day, at 4:31, I was already in my car. I was like 10 minutes away. So by 4:40, I was home. And at 4:45, I registered for my first real estate course. And
that's amazing.
And then serendipitously, it just worked out where in April 2007, I ended up getting my real estate license. And why is April so important? Because April is actually my birth month. So I feel like every work anniversary in my real estate career, it's almost like a birthday gift to myself that just continues to give. And so that's the story of how I got into the real estate business in 2007.
Well, it's April 30th, so happy birthday month, which is,
Thank you.
I guess now we're at the end of the month, so I can say that confidently you've had your birthday already. And
Absolutely.
and I love hearing the stories about that moment that sticks with you, that 9:30 in the morning, you can probably remember the room, you can probably remember all those details that sticks with you. And it's those moments that really do shape and define those key transitions in our lives that we will hold on to and be able to retell that many years later. So I love that that's part of your journey, and a really important one. So let's get into your story a little bit now. So we know that you registered for the license, you got your real estate license in April, but tell us a little bit more about what the shape of your life looked like at that stage. So what was your financial mindset as a young realtor? Where were you at within your stage of life, and how did that kind of shape your career mindset at that time?
Yeah, absolutely. So at that time, I was in my late 20s. And I was a single guy still. And at the time, I had plans of moving out and living on my own. But, taking care of my parents was something that was really important, something that traditionally in our family, we're very mindful of that. And it's something that we still carry on to this day. So the opportunity to move out was there. But again, just being mindful of my parents and being there to look after them, financially, plus also, physically being there to help them with the home. Those were things that kept me there. And so as things progressed, I was at home, was living at home, obviously paying a rent as well. So I was actually paying a monthly rent to my parents to live there. And so financially, I wouldn't say I was like, comfortable or well off or jet setting or anything, but I wasn't in a really bad place. But, I definitely was in a position where I was motivated to get more for myself. And, again, being new into the business, our heritage, our family didn't have a lot of experience in the real estate side of things, besides obviously building a villa in Tunisia, which is where my parents are from, in the Mediterranean. And so at that point in time, there wasn't a lot of, business or professional experience that I could rely on for advice and support. And with the brokerage that I joined at the time, the firm itself was very small. I think we were only like 4 people, including a broker of record, an administrator, myself, and another real estate agent. And in fact, the real estate agent who became my quote unquote trainer or manager was actually someone that I actually took the course with as well. So we actually wrote our licensing exam together. And that wasn't so an acquaintance, someone that I had known through another friend, kind of became friends as well as we were going through the licensing process together. And he informed me about the opportunity of joining his uncle, who was actually now setting up this multidisciplinary firm, including the real estate arm that I was going to be working in. And to my surprise, I met it. Everything sounded very promising. It seemed like the potential was there. And when I met with the owner, we had a really great rapport right out the gate. He was an older gentleman, no wife, no kids. That'll be important to note for later, but was someone that he definitely seemed very much invested in the business and in the potential of what he was trying to do. And for me, just seeing that and seeing the synergy of working with, a close-knit group like that, I just saw the opportunity as something that fit in the mold of what I wanted. And in my naivety at the time, I just jumped all in, both feet first. I never really went and interviewed other brokerages. I never did any of the research involved to see what was out there. I just, it felt good right out the gate. And so I just went forward and joined this particular firm in 2007. And and that's essentially what I did. So I got into the business at that time. At the time I was still working part-time. I was still working at my role with the retail at the corporate office, in the national corporate office. But then I was doing the real estate business part-time to start. And through the first year or so, I did 0 deals, but I actually had 4 conditional sales. So I managed to do 4 sales that never closed. They just fell apart for one reason or another. And some of it was due to inexperience. Other sides of it were also due to other implications that were beyond my control. So.
Yeah, and April 2007, for the next year of anybody who's, familiar with the great financial crisis, this was a very precarious time, especially in the real estate industry. So I can imagine that had some sort of influence, perhaps, along your journey. I want to take a step back and just talk about the firm that you, as you say, jumped with 2 feet into. What was the structure of that company, and which elements were you involved with?
Absolutely. So it was a multidisciplinary organization. And so the professional services that this firm was offering touched on several pillars that also catered to real estate in a general sense. There was the real estate arm, which I was a part of. And then there was a mortgage arm, which I was indirectly a part of, but helped to grow. There was an insurance arm for life, investments, etc. I had no involvement in, but was also one of the pillars of the umbrella company. And then the fourth pillar, which is really important to note, is also the Mortgage Investment Corporation. So there was a mortgage investment fund for private mortgage lending that was also a part of the umbrella group, which I was also not involved in. So my direct involvement was in the real estate arm specifically, and I had some indirect involvement with the mortgage business later on in my career with the firm.
And how did your initial role in the realty arm evolve as your time with the company went forward? So you had 4 conditional sales in the first year that didn't go anywhere, but then you definitely progressed beyond that. So tell us that story.
Yeah. So that first year, as I mentioned, for conditional sales, so got the experience, but didn't get to see it through, right? So I didn't get the pay with the experience. So, but the second year, I managed to do actually six transactions in 2008 while I was still working full time. And in 2009, the ownership offered me an opportunity to jump in full time, not only in a sales role, but also in a management position as well, to help grow and recruit on the real estate side. And so in 2009, I left my full time role with the retail organization that I was with for 4 years, and then I joined also conveniently in April. So it was also in April, and I remember, and the reason why I remember that is because the last day at that office was actually on my birthday. It was like April 5th was my last day. So I actually left that corporation on my birthday and then started, like, it was a Friday, and then the following Monday I jumped in full time into the real estate organization. And I was offered, a very small salary. Like, I think it was like $20 or $25,000 a year to keep the lights on. And the opportunity that was presented at the time was that I would be coming in, obviously helping to build the brokerage business. And in time, if things pan out and things work out and I show myself to be capable, with an opportunity to become a partner in the business. So the whole scenario was presented in a way where it was just like multiple rungs up. And it felt like it was an opportunity to fast track my career growth from where I was to where I wanted to be by like a handful of years. So it felt like I was going to save like 5 to 10 years in my growth projection. And so it just felt really appealing. There was a comfort level that I had because of the close relationship that I had with the owner. By this time, my friend and acquaintance who I was studying with, who had become my manager, by this time he had already moved on from the organization. There was something acrimonious that happened between them. And I was never the kind of person that liked to get involved in office politics or gossip and whatnot. So I just kind of kept to myself, and I saw an opportunity with the gentleman leaving for me to kind of take on a more active role, to get more involved and have greater opportunities for myself.
Yeah, fantastic. And I can understand that as a young individual, hungry, wanting to further that growth, that sounds like an amazing opportunity that was put forth to you. Was there any documentation, agreements, or anything that was put on paper between you and the owner to solidify that growth path for yourself towards partnership?
I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to say no. There was an employment agreement that we had in place. But again, in my naivety at the time and just my inexperience, I did not put any weight or value or stock into such things. And I felt, because of the nature of the relationship that I had with these individuals, it really felt like a handshake agreement was more than enough to satisfy any of those things. And I guess in hindsight, of course, everything's always 2020. But those were some things that I wish I could maybe kind of press a little bit more on to protect myself. But I just, again, one, inexperience, naivety, maybe gullibility as well, as you wanted to say. These were all factors that kind of impacted me. And I felt this trust level, a level of trust that I felt with the owner, that to me, just it felt like it was so believable and real. It felt like this was something that, it felt like a formality that would work itself out. And I didn't want to overcomplicate something where I saw an opportunity that I was really excited for. And I just decided to take a leap of faith and jump in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that relationship of trust is something that can resonate with a lot of individuals in similar circumstances, especially in smaller businesses or businesses that don't have a lot of principals involved, where it really is, you can see all the people on the ground and you trust those individuals a lot. So I can understand why that would have been, not something that pen to paper was put forth. Now, what was your financial involvement with the company? I know that you were promised, a career path of growth, but you definitely put some stakes on the table yourself. Can you talk about how your own personal finances were impacted by those promises?
Absolutely. I'm happy to share that. So I'll be very straightforward. I saw this as an opportunity. Financially, it was a step back. It was definitely a step back, but I wasn't looking at the immediate reward at the time. I was looking at a big picture. And so some of the ways that I ended up restructuring my contract was, okay, well, let's look at what was promised. I was promised an opportunity to become a partner in the organization, was to actually have a stake. And then eventually, because the owner was an older gentleman who was already, in his at the time, he was in his, I think, mid to late 60s. So he was already at a stage in his life where for him, he was now looking for that succession plan. And I was made out to be a successor for the organization. So the opportunity, again, like just looking at what it was about becoming not just a partner, but eventually becoming the managing partner, like the main stakeholder in the whole organization. And so I gave back a significant chunk of the commission earnings that I got to go back into the company so that money would be reinvested for growth, for opportunities to hire and retain talent, and also to be in a position where we can, kind of accelerate the expansion. And I saw that opportunity where I was basically reinvesting. I didn't see me kind of giving money away or anything. The way I looked at it at the time, it was a reinvestment into a business opportunity that I was going to have a stake in. And so I was giving a significant, I'll be honest, I was giving 97% of the commission GCI that I was earning back to the organization based on that premise. So financially, although I was selling a ton, and for this particular franchise, I was ranked in the top 20 to 25 in all of Canada in 2009, 2010, and 2011. And so I was really set up in a way that was going to, everything felt like it was aligning. Let's just put it that way. And I never thought for a moment that by reinvesting the way that I was really just giving away everything.
And how did that impact you personally? So during that time when you were very successful as a realtor, you were still making probably less than minimum wage on the salary that you were given. So how did you live? How did you pay your bills at that time?
Well, like most self-employed individuals, you kind of have to rely on all kinds of different resources, including credit sometimes and debt. So I had to take on quite a bit of debt to survive. Obviously, some line of credit, my credit cards. And the one thing that I was really adamant on, and it's something that's also part of my own principle. I never wanted to borrow any money from anyone, whether it was my family, friends, anyone. That to me is something that I never wanted to do. And thankfully I never did. And so, I just relied on my own resources. So it was my own personal debt. I was at the time in a relationship with another person, and we were at that time talking about getting married and stuff. So there were some things there as well that were percolating. I had a motorcycle at the time. I still ride, but I don't have one right now. But I had to sell my motorcycle as an example. So I was finding ways to supplement that by really taking on debt and selling personal items. I had a ton of RSPs at the time, like going back at that time, like they were like close to $100,000. I cashed all of that out as well, just so I can cover debt payments, cover my own living expenses as well. And really, it was that was really it. Like it was really like just relying on all of whatever savings and whatever debt access that I had.
Yeah, that's quite the sacrifice personally, which really shows the trust that you had in the owner and in the organization to have that succession plan in place for you. But I think you mentioned before, there was really never anything put forth to you that promised you that on paper. So at what point did you start to recognize or realize that there was a lot of promises being made, but things were starting to maybe not look like they had been on the surface?
I would say probably around 2000, like end of 2011, beginning of 2012. It was probably when things started to unravel, in the sense where a lot of things that just, there were occurrences that just didn't start. Like there's just a lot of things that just didn't make sense. Just being in the office itself, like just the atmosphere, the mood, lawyers coming and going, certain clients coming and going on a more frequent basis. It was just a lot of things that were happening internally that were very, very weird. And so that was one of the first things that kind of threw me off. But the main thing, I think, at the time that really kind of drove home that there was an issue that kind of popped the bubble, let's say, or burst the bubble, was when our commission and deposit trust accounts on the real estate side, when they were frozen. So they were frozen by a court order called a Mariva injunction. And what a Mariva injunction is that it's a court order that is issued by the courts, and it's usually a motion that's brought forward by plaintiffs to a lawsuit. And they would bring this motion forward to the courts whenever there's a fear that the defendant, especially in financial cases or financial lawsuits, that a defendant might liquidate or you know what I mean, basically eliminate all of the assets that they have. And if there's like substantial, if there's like a substantial case for that, then the court will issue that order. And so a Mariva injunction was actually put on our whole organization, and that included all of the trust accounts. And the reason why we found out about this was because we actually had a transaction. It was our listing, and it was a sale that was conditional. And so we had the buyer's deposit in trust. And when it came time to complete the mutual release and reissue the deposit to the purchaser, there were significant delays that came with that. Typically, a turnaround time for something like that is at most 5 business days, like a week. These buyers, unfortunately, had to wait almost a month to be able to get their funds back, just because the check had to be signed off by all the parties associated to that motion. And that was really the first indicator that, like the first true indicator that there was something awry with the situation at the office.
So that, as a realtor, I'm sure was stressful. First of all, having to talk to your clients about, where the money is and what is happening without really having an idea of what was happening. And I'm sure that you weren't able to speak candidly to your clients either about everything going on behind the scenes. So tell us a little bit more of the story. Like, what happened? What was going on? And where did the mismanagement occur?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. I mean, there's very little I could share because I knew very little. Like, a lot of this was stuff that was happening behind the scenes that I had no idea about. And it was just, again, like I was just as dumbfounded as many of the clients that were involved that were affected by this. And so essentially, just to kind of share the long story short before we kind of dive into it, what happened was that as the business was progressing, it turned out that the owner was actually depleting the funds of the Mortgage Investment Corporation and was accused of doing so illegally. So it was basically being accused of running a Ponzi scheme. Any investor in the Mortgage Investment Corporation typically will receive a monthly dividend payment, a check that, for their as interest, as a return on their investment. And at some point, those checks stopped coming. Now, again, as I said, I had zero knowledge or awareness of any of this stuff. I was so busy with not only managing the real estate arm, but also building our firm. So while all of these kind of behind the scenes things were happening, I was out on the road. I grew our firm from 4 agents, including the broker, the man, the owner, an administrator, myself, and then my acquaintance who left at this point. And I was responsible for growing our company on the real estate and mortgage side to over 60. I think we were like 64 mortgage and real estate professionals across 4 locations. So I was managing our head office location. I was managing an office at the Woodbine Center. I was managing an office at Bramalea City Center, and then and the 4th one at Scarborough Town Center. And we had representation across all of these. Not only was I responsible for managing and hiring and retaining staff for these locations, I was also responsible for setting up these booths and setting up these locations, negotiating all of those contracts. So I was really out on the road while a lot of the backdoor stuff was happening, and I had no clue. I had no clue that these guys were bleeding the fund until it was way too late.
Wow.
And so, yeah. And some of the things, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, for those who are not familiar with the Mortgage Investment Corporation, as somebody who wants to invest in a MIC, as they're short formally called, the purpose is to receive those dividend payments and to get that consistent income stream. So that would have been, I assume, from a shareholder's or a stakeholder's perspective, the first red flag from their perspective. But knowing that you were so busy and really had zero involvement with the MIC arm of that, I could assume that came as a massive surprise to you. Was there any involvement from your client's perspective with respect to the mix? So for instance, were the buyers or the sellers that you were liaising with also investing in the MIC?
I did have a few clients that were also investors in the MIC. I also had a few clients that were borrowers from the MIC as well. And so all of these clients that were associated with the MIC, those were clients that were actually referred to me internally. So they were originally, whether they came through a mortgage inquiry or they were already existing investors in the MIC, any of the real estate services that we then provided, it was almost like, okay, an extension. Like they were already existing clients of the mortgage or the Mortgage Investment Corporation, and then they just came to me for the real estate services. And in a couple of cases, there were so one case that I could share with you. And again, when I now look in hindsight, it's funny how clearly blatant this was. There was one situation where I was working with a buyer who actually was borrowing was basically getting a first mortgage out of this MIC. We did the deal. It was a home in Brampton. It was a decent. I mean, it was a good sale for them. It was a good deal. But what was fishy was the loan to value ratio. I think they financed the deal at like 105% of loan to value. So what that means is they actually gave 105%. So basically they gave over and above in money to the borrower than what the home was worth. So they lent more money than what the home was worth to the borrower.
Wow.
And when you think about it, right? Yeah. And when you think about it in the grand scheme of it, it makes sense because they were really trying to kind of inflate a portfolio, make it look like it was, producing. But really what they were doing is they were just filling it up with junk deals. And, unfortunately for that person, when they get stuck in a situation like that, now what's going to happen when the time comes for them to renew, right? Like they were basically in a hole.
Yeah.
They were in a major hole, especially once the funds, especially once the company kind of went upside down. It really put them in a bad place. Another client that I worked with, and this one really sticks with me, and I'll never forget them for the rest of my life. It was an older couple, retired. They were living in a custom-built home in Burlington. Nice, beautiful, beautiful detached bungalow, custom-built. Very nicely done. These people were mortgage-free. Like they were in a good place. Like, it felt like it was my parents. Okay. And they were active investors in the fund. And I'll never forget them being convinced. And this was at this particular transaction happened at the late stages of my time with this organization. It was just before things started to really come apart. And Yeah, I'll never forget it. They were convinced that they needed to sell the home that they were in, which was mortgage free. Like it was at the time, today, like 2024, the home value is probably like 1.5, 1.6 million. So it's like a $600,000 property going back in 2012, 2011. It's a beautiful, beautiful home. And so they were convinced to sell the property, take the proceeds, put it back into the fund, and buy something smaller for themselves. And that's what they did. We helped them sell the home, and then we helped them buy something small. And literally every last penny of the net proceeds that were left over went into the fund.
And who convinced them to do that? Was it somebody else on the mix side who convinced them that that was a good idea? How did that transpire?
It was the owner. The owner was directly involved. He basically ran the mortgage investment fund, almost like with an iron fist.
Yeah.
There were no outsiders at all. When I think about it now, there were maybe the only directly involved parties administering, I should say, that MIC were the owner, the controller, our in-house controller, accountant, and of course the lawyers. Like our lawyers at the time, they were literally like in the office beneath us. And I remember we were joking, like we could have literally put like a fire pole or like a stairwell to go from the owner's office right down to the lawyer's office. It was literally that. Like it was that's what it was. And they were spending a lot of time in our office, and even more time towards the end of my time there.
So this couple that you're referring to, they cashed everything in. They did downsize and purchase a smaller home and invested the rest into the MIC. So what ended up happening with their story?
Their story, I think, was just like a lot of other victims of this particular investment scam. They at least from what I remember, they were basically left out in the cold. They got all their proceeds invested. They stopped receiving dividend payments as well, just like many other investors. And they were just left in the cold. Like they were trying to reach out to the owner. They were trying to reach out to the controller. They were trying to reach out to someone. And they couldn't connect with anybody on that side. So the owner, she called me. And, I still, like it still gives me chills when I think about it. Like I said, like it's something I'll never forget that conversation, just how devastated she was. She was just like, she called me on the phone and she was bawling. She's like, Elias, I can't get a hold of anyone. Where's this person? Where's the owner? Where's the controller? Please, I just need some answers. I just want my money back. I just want my money. And bawling as she's saying that. And it's like, I just want my money. I just want my money. And I could hear her husband in the background saying, we need help. We need help. And all I could say to them was, guys, I honestly have no idea what's going on. I have no clue. I had no idea where anyone was. I went into our head office maybe a few days later. And this was, like I said, towards the very end. And I remember going in. By this point, there was already a mass exodus of our agents from the mortgage and real estate side. Many people had left. And I walked into our office space and our head office to go and just see what was going on. And it literally felt like I walked into a scene from the movie Boiler Room, where you walk in, the place is empty, and there's just a single phone. Wow. All the cubicles were empty. There was one phone that was like set up in the underwriting office. The place was almost deserted. And, I walked around, found no one, left, called the owner, told me he was at lunch, came back after an hour, and then we started talking about everything that was going on. And then eventually had no choice but to share with me exactly what the details were that the company was facing. And the company was facing some massive lawsuits from a number of investors, plaintiffs, that in his words were accusing him of misappropriating the funds in the Mortgage Investment Corporation. A former sales partner of mine, someone that I had worked with during my time as a manager there, he had a bit of an acrimonious split with the ownership group. He was also implicated in the lawsuit, and he ended up cooperating with the plaintiffs to share his notes, his details. And after he left, he, we stayed in touch. He was, someone I considered a friend. I still consider him, I guess, a friend. And so when we met, he wanted to tell me, he was so adamant that I needed to meet with him in person. So we met in person, and he had with him the file, the summons, whatever the disclosure is for the case from the courts. And he let me read it, and I read it. And it stunned me. It really stunned me. And as I was going through and seeing, it made me realize that I was also an indirect victim. And it made me feel so embarrassed and ashamed. Not because of the money that I was around, but because, one, I felt like I was felt used and betrayed. And I felt like these guys were going to set me up as the mark to take the fall for everything. And as things were unfolding, as the news of the Unraveling injunction made its way to the Real Estate Council of Ontario, RICO got involved and did a complete audit, not only of our trade records, our reconciliations, but they also took a look at all of our business dealings. They wanted to see everything. They investigated me as well to see exactly what my implication was in the whole situation. And they found that I had zero involvement. I had no implication at all. The only things that I was involved in were, again, assisting clients that were referred to me through the organization that had a connection to the fund, whether as a borrower or an investor. And so basically, as we went through all of that, and I had and I'd read the file, I never told the owner that I saw the information. I just didn't want to complicate it any more than it already was. It was just a complete mess. But I actually confronted him, and I decided to ask him, what's going on here? What are you guys setting me up? What are you guys doing here? You're setting me up for failure? Are you setting me up to take a fall? I need some answers. I need to know what's going on. And then finally, he opened up and shared that these were the details, that there were, in his words, there was a mutiny afoot. People were coming after him and his business and wrongfully accusing him of misappropriating funds, but that was not the case. And he told me, again, the same words. I'll never forget it. He's like, Elias, you're like my son. You're the legacy. You're the next generation of this company. I don't have a wife. I don't have kids. You're the one that's going to take this over. You're the future. And it's funny, he reiterated the same thing. He's like, you have nothing to worry about. This is how it's going to be. I promise you got nothing to worry. You're like my son. And it just, for the first time, the words felt so hollow and empty. And then again, just reading, I was able to see, truthfully, for the first time, I was able to see that this guy had been lying to me from the very beginning.
And you gave him, like, several opportunities to be forthcoming with you. You had that initial conversation, you read the Unraveling injunction, you read the documentation that your colleague provided you with, you sat down with him again, you gave him another opportunity to come clean, and he still held on to the charade, so to speak. And at that point, you were able to see through that. And I can only imagine how devastating that must have felt for you, because you had put so much trust and faith in that individual. Was that the point that you decided to cut ties with the organization and the owner, or what eventually led to that decision?
Yeah, it was in 2012. I think by this point now, the company had been basically torn down to shreds, you could almost say. It had been several months that the accounts were frozen. the majority of like I said, 95% of the mortgage and real estate professionals had already left the organization. And so there was really, at that point, it was just vultures picking at the bones, if I can use that expression. And, for me, I needed to know more. I needed to know the truth. And going through and just seeing a lot of the things that I saw, I was able to kind of discover for myself where a lot of the funds were going. The owner had one of his brother who was like, he was just a plumber. We set up a general contracting organization, and he was basically overcharging for renovations, basically slapping a coat of paint on foreclosed properties that the private mortgage fund repossessed, and literally slapping a coat of paint, a little bit of air freshener, like a $2,000-$3,000 job, and be charging like $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 on the invoices. So this was how they were depleting the funds. And they were draining them that way. But we all know when it comes to mortgage investment corporations, the funds, they cannot be used for this sort of thing. They can't use them for construction loans, renovation loans. A mortgage investment corporation can only be used as a mortgage on existing brick and mortar real estate. It's not to build something. It has to be an existing property that's there that can be used as collateral against the debt that's being taken on.
Yeah, how do you think that slipped through the cracks then? So if that is not an allowable business for a MIC, how did legal not pick up on that? How did that not get audited prior to this point?
I feel, and this is my personal belief, I really believe that the owner was not the only involved party in this particular situation. For something like this to be able to manifest and to do what it's doing, I feel like you require more than one person's involvement. Again, I feel very strongly that the controller probably had his hand in it based on the way that the books were being presented to investors, right? Like all of the disclosures, because you have to disclose the performance of this fund to the shareholders, which are the investors, right? I feel like there was not most likely, I'm almost certain of it, there was manipulation of that. And so that was used to obviously coerce investors into thinking everything was good. They had some real estate in their portfolio, but all of them were like when you look at the deals, they were all poorly underwritten. Like we're talking about everything was like 100, 105, 110 loan to value. Like all of the properties were what in industry terms called underwater, essentially over leveraged, more debt than the home is worth. And there were a ton of those properties that were on the portfolio. And of course, a lot of these investors, I feel like the owner kind of targeted them, knowing that these were, so if you're familiar with Amway or Interbiz, these multi-level marketing sorts of business models, a lot of the investors were from this Amway arm called Interbiz, which was a local digital multi-level marketing organization. And a lot of the investors that the owner targeted were from this umbrella of investor of people. Technically, basically individuals that were looking for any way possible to get rich quick, right? Like these were people motivated and with a major desire to grow their wealth, and he took advantage of that. And so I feel like having these investors come in, obviously as a Ponzi, new money comes in, you pay out the dividend. And then of course, I feel like the lawyers were also involved. I have no doubt in my mind that all of these three had an involvement. And again, this is my personal opinion. I'm not looking to accuse anyone or anything at this point, but just the way that it all laid out, when I now look at the whole situation, it just felt like all of these parties, because anything that had to do with the fund, these were the only three people that were directly involved in it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I can't see who else could be, I can't see how none of them or how two of the three would have been oblivious to all of this.
Yeah, that sounds almost too good to be true from that perspective. So, it's a logical assumption, I would say, that there was more parties involved. So what ended up happening with the company, and were any of those individuals ever brought to justice through the court hearings?
Absolutely. So it's, again, unfortunate circumstances of this whole thing. In my eyes, I feel, again, and I'm not the courts, I'm not the law, but in my eyes, I feel like justice was not served. And I'll tell you why. The plaintiffs to the lawsuit, they were numerous. It was almost like I don't know what the numbers are to define a class action, but there were numerous plaintiffs on this lawsuit. A lot of individual investors that were seeking seeking retribution. They were seeking their money back. So what happened was, as the organization was winding down, as this lawsuit started to get more and more complex, there's a lot of layers that kept getting introduced. The plaintiffs started infighting. They started fighting against it. So so there was just chaos on the plaintiff side. The plaintiffs started suing each other. It got very, very messy on that side. And while all of that was happening, the owner on the other side, the organization was basically put into a receivership. And we're talking about a fund that had like millions and millions of, had it been done the right way, the fund today could easily be worth over $1 billion. But because of the way that, unfortunately, things played out, the fund was depleted. I think at the end of it all, the remaining assets in the company were like less than 6 million. I think it was like 6 or 7 million that were left over. And we're talking about like at least 25 to $30 million in the fund. Modest, but substantial enough to grow a portfolio over time.
So did anything happen to the owner? Was he brought to justice, or did he sort of get away with the money scot-free in this case?
I'll be honest with you. I feel like he likely got away with it. And the reason why is because nothing happened. There was no criminal charges. There was no, as far as I know, there was no finality or outcome really with the lawsuit. I personally completely detached myself by that point, just by just from sheer personal devastation. On a personal side, like it really devastated me, and I just completely detached from it. But as far as I can tell, I don't believe anything happened to the owner, which is a shame because there's no justice. I think a lot of people lost their money, and it's sad because typically in these types of scenarios, it's actually very common.
Yeah,
that this is the way that these things play out when it comes to white collar crime. It's very tricky. And typically when the court process is also very long-winded. And then when you run into a scenario where a lawsuit gets complicated, where plaintiffs are now infighting and kind of suing each other, it just throws everything into a disarray.
Of course. And legal fees eat up whatever might be remaining inside the company anyway. I know there's other big, still ongoing lawsuit with another large hedge fund that had billions actually invested in it. And I won't name it on the podcast, but I was one of the investors in that myself. So I can speak to sort of, being in a way involved with really just a lot of trust in the leadership of that fund and the pedigree of it. And I'm sure that people felt similarly in this case. It's devastating financially for so many, and it's just so unfortunate that these these financial products that typically are there to provide stability and income to individuals in let's say maybe somewhat vulnerable stages of life, like the retiree couple that you mentioned, are implicated in this. But I want to touch base with you for a minute because you mentioned once you cut ties with the firm. I mean, I can't even imagine how devastating this must have been for yourself personally. So however you're comfortable. Do you mind sharing how that impacted your personal life and relationships through that time period?
Yeah, absolutely. It completely ruined me. I'll be honest with you on a number of fronts. Let's start with the first one. When it came to the financial side, it essentially bankrupted me. And at one point, I was sleeping in my car.
Oh my
Like we're
gosh.
talking like majorly, like I was crippled financially. And in total, with debt and money reinvested, but in total, we could laugh about it now, right? But
Yeah, yeah.
in total, I think it was like, yeah, I was like close to maybe, it was like with the debt and everything and the revenue that I gave, yeah, it was almost like $1 million
Wow.
that I put back into not only reinvesting in terms of my commission earnings over the period of time that I was there, plus the personal debt that I had to take on, plus, all of that, which really, like I said, that was really what was crippling financially. I remember I was also at the time, I was looking at a loft. It was a brand new loft at the time at the Broadview in Easter. And I was in there with the designer and the builder. It was like a raw space. And I was so excited. Like I was about to move forward with it. This was when I first found out about everything. I was ready to get it done. I was going to get it funded through, through our mortgage arm. Like it was too good to be true. And then I found out about what happened and I had to pull back. I wasn't able to move forward with it. It's a shame because it's like a $2 or $3 million loft today. Right. So
Yeah.
funny how life works, but yeah. So a lot of these were some of the losses on the financial side, crippled me. No doubt about it. From the personal side of things, the situation, just because of how it affected me, it alienated me with my friends. It alienated me with my family. I really felt like I was completely alone. My personal relationship at the time, fell apart. And I had no one, if I can be honest with you, I had no one that I could really turn to and talk to at this time. And I felt so alone. I felt so ashamed. I was so embarrassed. I was so humiliated by the whole thing. And just being associated with it, I felt so dirty. And because this was never my intention, was to get into a scenario like this where these sorts of things were involved. I've always been of the mindset of helping people, enriching people's lives, making those around me better. And for me to then have gone through this, especially as my first endeavor into the real estate world, it really messed me up personally, like on an emotional, like the PTSD, the stress. I had to leave the business for a couple of years. And I couldn't face anyone.
And I can only imagine, I mean, going from the feeling of, in a way, being on a high or in this position where you feel like you have a path and a career growth and you can envision what the future looks like for yourself, to having everything wiped away from you, that almost just resetting the clock to zero. I can only imagine just how soul shaking that would have been for you, having to kind of step back and re-examine everything in your life. That's awful. And I'm really sorry that you had to experience that. That's devastation for you. I want to focus a little bit on your own personal journey to recovery and empowerment post all of that happening, to take, let's say, a positive spin on that. So how did you come out of all of this?
I just wanted to first say, Andrea, I really appreciate your kind words of empathy. I think they mean a lot. And I'll be honest, I don't know if I'll ever fully overcome, to be honest with you. I think there'll always be something, even if it's a small piece, there'll always be something there that will remind me of this experience, this journey. What I've done, though, with time is I have used this experience rather than to lament. I've I've now pivoted, and I now use this to galvanize. So it's now changed my perspective, and I owe a lot of that to these mentors that I met, two entrepreneurs, two brothers who took me in under their wing. And at that time, I was honestly I was just completely I was just completely devastated. I was starting from brand spanking new, like literally from the very, very scratch, from the very bottom. And I remember, like, no one would give me an opportunity or a chance to at least get off my feet at that time. And so these two gentlemen, mentors of mine, they're two brothers who are they run a very successful entrepreneurial company. It's a management consulting firm, software that caters to the education sector. And they gave me a chance when no one would. And I basically started from ground zero again. I started in a customer service role. So literally just had to check the ego at the door. And I just started from the very beginning again. And it took me a few months to check the ego. When I say check the ego, it wasn't like I was walking in there pretending like I was the man or anything like that. But it was a personal internal ego where I felt so, going back to the whole embarrassment and the shame, I felt like here I am, like I tried to, and just like you said earlier, right? Like I felt like I was like near the peak of the mountain. I was climbing, I was on this ascent, and I was near the top, and I could see the peak, I could see the summit. And then all of a sudden the ice caved in from underneath my feet and brought me right back down to the base of the mountain again. And, if you're falling that high, it does hurt, right? Like It does hurt. It's a lot of rolling down the hill. So it definitely put me in a position where that was really where my ego was having a hard time adjusting to, was the reset, was having to start all over again from the base. And it took me a little bit of time to get my head out of my ego, like get the ego out of my head, let's say, so that I can actually put the effort into the new role that I was in, that it deserved, and to start repaying the loyalty or the trust that the two brothers showed in me. I'll be honest, I feel like I was maybe a day or two from getting fired from that job. Right? Because I had certain things that I needed to do, but just because of where my head was at, I would show up and I couldn't do it. I couldn't pick up the phone. I couldn't call people. I couldn't have these conversations that I needed to have, because that was the responsibility of my role. I needed to come up with these organizations, but I couldn't do it. And so one day I actually met my now wife. And she was also someone that really helped me. Like when I opened up to her and I shared with her everything, she was the first person that really, kind of instilled some belief in me by saying, and I told her exactly what I was dealing with from the very beginning, because I didn't want a relationship to grow where I was still in a financial hole and I wouldn't be able to provide certain things or do certain things that would allow us to move up in life. And I wanted to be honest and open with her from the start. So I shared with her what the deal was. And to my surprise, she stuck around. And she said, look, she was really not happy about the situation, but she saw the potential in me. She said that there was something here that, there's something here that we could rebuild on. And she kind of gave me the courage to move forward. And that also translated in my performance at my role with the consulting firm that I was with, because as I said, I was maybe like hours away from being shown the door. It was that close, and I knew it. I felt it inside. I wasn't performing. I was able to acknowledge that I was not performing the way I should have. But one morning I just looked in the mirror and I said, look, you got to do this the right way. This isn't who you are. Put in the energy that you need to. You have a little bit of belief, pay these people back in kind. And I started, and then slowly, I started to build to the point where I was managing 30% of our firm's client base, which was pretty impressive, I thought. And if it wasn't for my wife giving me that initial kind of affirmation to reset myself, I probably wouldn't have had the opportunity to stay closely with my mentors here, who over a period of a few years, not only were they, catalysts with me regaining my confidence in myself, but they were also huge fans and supporters of a lot of my ideas, a lot of the things that I would bring forward, a lot of my solutions that I would suggest. And it just kind of helped build my confidence. I checked my ego at the door. Instead of becoming a lead, I just focused on being the best team player that I could be, not only for my mentors, the owners of my firm, but also for my colleagues that were with me, working alongside of me. Because we were such a small organization, we were like less than 30 people in the firm. If you didn't do your part, you stuck out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I really embraced the team player concept and just immersed myself into it and gave myself fully into the role and just let myself kind of grow in that way. All this time, I still had in the back of my mind this pit of unfinished business with the real estate side of things. I felt ripped off.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like, I got ripped off of my career because this was something that I wanted for myself. And I wasn't in it anymore because of my own failings, because I took missteps, because I wasn't good enough. Right? That's where I felt really ripped off. I felt ripped off that someone took away a passion of mine, a business that I was really passionate about, that I had so much desire for.
Yeah.
And I couldn't, it just kept gnawing at the back of my head. And then when I got engaged with my wife, or one night I was just sitting there laying in bed thinking, how am I going to pay for this wedding? I mean, I was doing all right with my role at the time, but I just wasn't interested in driving Uber or anything like that. And, it just kind of hit me. It was like, why don't I take a look and see if I can reactivate my real estate license? And I looked into it, and I was maybe like 6 weeks away from having it lapse, where I would have to start all over again. So when I saw it, I took that as a sign. So I ended up doing the course, getting it. And then another sign that happened for me, a childhood friend of mine who had been living in their home. They were actually renting the home that they were living in at the time. And his wife and his 2 young children. The landlord came to them and said, hey, I want to sell this house. Do you think you can move? So they started looking and trying to find something. This is, I think, in around 2015. They were trying to find a place to live. They couldn't find anything. They wanted to buy something. They were getting outbid. There was just nothing that they could find. So my friend was talking to me about it. We were just sharing, just talking, and he was just sharing his frustration with the whole situation. And I suggested to him, well, if the landlord wants to sell and you're happy with where you are, why don't you just buy it? Just buy it from them and do it privately.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually coached him through the whole thing and helped him negotiate the price that he got for it. And it was it turned out to be a fantastic situation for him and his family. And It worked out well for the landlord as well, who was very satisfied with the outcome, that they didn't have to go through preparing, marketing, all of that stuff. So it just worked out. And that was the second thing that said to me, that was like the second sign that said, you're good at this. You need to be doing this. And people need, the world needs people like you, Elias, because you're doing this for the right reasons, which is to help people, which is to not only help them, but also to support them to do the best, to take the best possible steps for their lives. And that enrichment was something that brought a tremendous amount of satisfaction to me personally. And so those 2 signs were really the catalyst. One, that my license hadn't lapsed and I was able to get it back up. And then the second thing was, of course, helping my friend, a childhood friend who was otherwise struggling to get into the housing market, actually get into it. And it actually brought a tear to my eye that night when I helped him and he called me to tell me that they were successful in buying the house. It was the first time since I left the business where I truly, truly, truly felt like I belong in that. I not only belong in the real estate game or in the business, I shouldn't call it a game, not only do I belong in the real estate business, but people need me in this business. And I have to, I had a moral obligation to now use my past experience of what I've gone through and use that in a way to encourage others to avoid those types of pitfalls, but also to protect consumers from scenarios and predators like that. So I felt even more galvanized and more motivated than ever to get back into the business for that reason.
Yeah, Elias, your
and
story...
And of course, to pay for a wedding.
Yeah, and always to pay for the wedding.
Right?
There's so much of what you have just said that I want to comment on. First of all, your story really resonates to me as one of learning what trust truly is and looks like, but also learning the power of honesty. The one part that you mentioned about, being honest and forthcoming with your now wife, your future wife at the time, and her accepting you for yourself, I imagine was perhaps somewhat of a novel experience that you had to, internalize and take on, but also the trust that the two brothers put into you perhaps was a different experience than you had with the owner of the prior firm, in that trust was shown in a different way and it was earned. It wasn't just automatically given, where it seems like perhaps the owner of the prior firm just said, I'm going to give you the world. And you thought, fantastic, this is wonderful. I've got the world on my shoulders. And I love the rebuilding that you mentioned, because you truly, reflected on those past experiences, and as hard and challenging for yourself as an individual that it was to check the ego and to rebuild, it probably made you a much better realtor for it, right? And understanding the core of humanity and what helping people looks like. Sure, you have a job and you get paid for it, but the motivations are probably different than what they might have been if you had stayed and continuing to work for the firm that we're talking about. I just think it's a beautiful story, actually. And I who knows, we can't go back and rewrite our own histories, but I can only imagine that perhaps the lessons that you got from that entire experience may not have been the same if you hadn't gone through it, to land
Absolutely
you
not.
where you are today and how successful that you have gotten to today. And I know that hindsight is always 20/20 in any case in life, doesn't matter what we're talking about. But if you look back on the whole experience from start to finish of your story that you've shared with us today, is there anything that you wish that you could have approached differently or done differently? Or do you feel like you did the best that you could with the information that you had at the time?
I love that question. I think, I wish I could, it's like that question of what would you tell your 20-year-old self?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, now that you've lived a bit of a life, you can see enough behind you, you know exactly what's ahead. And I would say, if I was to go back and redo things differently, I think the first thing that I would probably do again, I would probably ask more questions. I think that would be the first thing that I would do. I would ask more questions. I'd maybe seek additional opinions. Definitely would have asked more questions about the whats, the whys, the hows, the whens. I think those would have been so important to have a little more clarity on. I think having additional advice would have also been very helpful. I wish I could have had an opportunity, whether it was talking to legal advice or talking to another business professional. I wish I had access to someone like that could have provided me with a little bit more of the mentorship and guidance and advice that could have helped me. And I don't blame anyone for that. I take responsibility just as equally for not seeking that guidance and advice, and for taking the information that was provided for its surface value. And so I would definitely tell my younger self that it's important to have things double checked by another party. Don't be afraid to ask questions. And if you're unsure, especially when it comes to contracts, when it comes to anything money related, like big money, I would definitely want to make sure that it's in writing and that I have a lawyer review any new contracts, and not just the lawyer that is suggested. I would want to have the lawyer of my choice give me the information and review it and nitpick it and tell me why I should not move forward with this proposal.
The power of independent advice.
100%.
Yes.
And unbiased, by getting that third party that's looking at the picture from the outside. It's so critical because there's so many things that we could miss when we're in the crux of a situation that, some fresh eyes would be able to maybe pick up a lot more easily. And I think having that different perspective, it's so important. And I think now, like, one of the things that I've evolved in is, I'm a lot more open-minded now as well because of that. So I'm always seeking not just advice, but I'm always asking people, what's your opinion on, or what is the perspective? I always want to hear the other side of the story before I make a decision or reach a conclusion. And I would say that would be something, that's another thing that for me has definitely evolved as well, that's come out of this.
I think we could all benefit from that specific perspective. I think we're all very quick to come up with our own judgments and points of view before we've had a chance to actually actively listen to the other side. I think that skill is one that is a lifelong journey to develop, active listening and really hearing the other person and internalizing what they're saying and reflecting upon it, and before coming up with judgments or citing your opinion, perhaps where it's not being asked to be cited, for example.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
It's very powerful. And thank you for sharing that. Just sort of, again, on hindsight, how, from your perspective and seeing, what the investors have gone through, and even from your perspective as an individual, how can people protect themselves from falling victim to things that seem too good to be true?
Absolutely. And I just want to preface something here as well. Despite the unfortunate experience that we both have endured when it comes to private investments, like whether it's a mortgage or a fund, I just want to reiterate that I strongly believe in the potential. And I absolutely am a huge advocate of investing in private mortgages or private funds, especially ones that are really well managed. And the thing that I would suggest to any party that's seeking to get into this sort of an investment is to do your due diligence. If it seems too good to be true, have your lawyer review it. You need to have this information. You need to have the details reviewed. This is the sort of thing where, as we know the saying, measure twice, cut once. In this case, you want to measure thrice. You want to make sure that you scrutinize every single detail when it comes to private mortgage investments. Research the organization that you're looking to invest in as well. And you want to make sure that cash flow analyses, anything financial, you want to have the right people scrutinizing those details and assisting you to support that decision-making process for you so that you're making the best possible decision. Anything when it comes to financial numbers, if you're unsure and you don't understand what it is that you're looking at when it comes to cash flow or statements, it's no embarrassment to go and connect with an accountant to have them review it. It's so important that you do that due diligence up front. Have your lawyer review all of the documents before you sign off. Review as much as you can, and don't be afraid to ask any question that you're unsure of the answer. It's your money.
Yeah.
It's your life savings in many cases. And to me, I see the opportunity for individuals that are investing in private mortgages as an example. I think it's a fantastic opportunity for those that are, let's say, in the process of maybe retiring, and maybe they don't have a nest egg outside of the real estate asset that they own. It's a huge opportunity for those individuals to now parlay their nest egg, their home, into a dividend-paying retirement investment that can help supplement them as they age gracefully and enjoy their retirement, their golden years. So I really believe in the value and the potential of it, but it's so important because of how sophisticated these investment tools are. You must get the right information, scrutinized, and you need to get everything. You need to get your questions answered. If you don't do these things, I don't know who you have to blame.
Yeah. Sage
You know
words.
what I mean? Like I feel, yeah.
Yeah. And I'll add to that, one element from the investment planning side of things is diversification is always important. So, all of your eggs in one basket is typically never an advisable strategy. So that's, number one. And then, I think the second thing is when you're dealing with private investments or investments that are somewhat illiquid is understand how you can get out of them. I think that's often an overlooked component. If you want to get out, how do you get out? What are the stipulations and provisions around that? Because that is often overlooked. If we're just looking at getting into something, we don't often think, but what if I want to get out? So I'll add that to your comments as well.
That's such a great insight. Honestly, Andrea, that's such a great insight. I think a lot of people don't think of their exit strategy until they're getting ready to get out. And as we know, as entrepreneurs, like when you're putting your plan together, sure, you want to focus on, okay, how do we get up and running and get it going and building momentum? But you still want to have that long-term goal in mind, which is eventually a succession plan, right? Whether you're succeeding someone to take over, or again, like having your exit strategy. So once you've reached a certain milestone or goal, now you're able to take that extra step, that next step of getting out of that particular situation. And with investments, it's no different. I would say and actually to your point, you nailed it on the head. You probably want to scrutinize that even more than you would with a business, right? I think with investments, you absolutely want to know exactly what type of timelines, because it all also associates with the level of risk. A lot of mortgage investment corporations, when you're investing in these are funds that are typically longer term investments, right? Like they're not really short term. And there are different solutions that are out there if someone's looking to invest in the private mortgage world, but they're looking to be more shorter term, whether it's a 12, 18, 24 months. There's a ton of options. But when it comes to the actual mortgage investment corporation, where it's a fund that's lending money out continuously to a portfolio of borrowers, that is usually best served as a long-term investment strategy. So you absolutely want to have, just as important as having your entry point, you absolutely want to know what your exit point would look like.
Yeah, for sure.
I fully agree with you on that.
Agreed. I'm going to transition to final thoughts.
Okay.
This has been a wonderful conversation, and I'm sure that you and I could keep talking for a while about this. But I want to know from your perspective, what is something that you want people to take away from this? If you had to have one lasting, resonating message to share with the world, what would that be?
I would say so I would say to the world that's watching this, that there are a lot of amazing investment opportunities in the world of private mortgage financing. So many amazing funds that are out there that are doing it exceptionally well and that are very successful with managing their investors' money. My advice is for anyone that's looking to get into this sort of or any investment, I would say do your research. Take your time and do your research. Connect with advisors that have an understanding in this space that can help you to, make the right decision based on your investments goals, based on your investment strategies that you'd like to deploy. Because like I said, the mortgage investment corporation world is just one facet of investing in private mortgages. There's so many other ways, depending on what your investment goals are, for you to be able to invest successfully. Ask the questions. Don't be afraid to ask the questions. There is no such thing as a bad question. This is your money. It's your life savings. You're investing for your future, for your kids' future. Take it as seriously as possible by asking every single question. Don't leave a question off the table if there's something that you're unsure of. Make it a priority to ask every single question. There is absolutely no shame in asking questions. And the more you ask, the more informed you will be. And of course, the most important thing, make sure you get the right legal advice. Get your own lawyer, and don't go for, it doesn't have to be the most expensive one. It doesn't have to be a cheap one. Don't go on price. Go on your feeling. And when I say that, it means find someone that you are entrusting This is a person that's representing your interests. So you need to feel comfortable to be able to share everything with them in confidence so that they can give you the best support possible. And having a legal advisor, an accounting advisor, mortgage, investment, real estate, it doesn't matter who the advisor is. What is important is that you have a level of comfort with that advisor where you're not afraid to ask anything. And the advisor's role is to give you that space for you to feel as comfortable as possible and to have that trust to be able to share that information. All of this is confidential when you're connecting with a principal as a client. We have the legal authority to give you the right advice, but in order for us to do that, we have to get all of the information from you. We need to know what your concerns are. We need to know what are your desires and what are the things that are a gray area for you. Let's kind of get those cleared out so that you're as informed as possible to make the best possible decisions for yourself. And take your time. Don't rush into something that may be too good to be true. One thing I can promise you with all mortgage investment funds, there's no such thing as a limited time only get in now or you'll never get in. You will always be able to get in. Take your time and do it the right way so that you're getting the maximum value for your investment dollars and for your peace of mind. Like, you want this to be as secure as possible. And the best way for you to do that is to take your time, do the right research to find the right fit for you and to invest with the right mindset. And from my end, I'm not managing a fund, but I'm associated to dozens of private mortgage funds that are available, all syndicated. They're all regulated with the financial services regulatory authorities across Canada. And these are all different funds that offer different levels of investment strategies to the different investors that are out there. I would rather do it that way, where I work with existing funds that are doing it really well and just act as an intermediary for my clients and then present them to those funds. I would much rather do that than take on a fund myself to invest and manage. It's a lot of work, but it doesn't bring as much work. Why compete with people that are already doing an exceptional job, right? If you can't beat them, join. That's the way I see it. So.
Or stay in where your eye of brilliance lies, right? Which,
that's it.
For
Absolutely.
you, we only have so many hours in the day to do what we want to do. So
100%.
We can't do it all.
100%.
And I agree with all of those words. So thank you. All of those words are so powerful, and I won't say them again. So you said them perfectly and wonderfully. And just sort of summarize everything. Where are you now? Are you happy? And where can people find all the good work that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start with where my head's at. I think that's a good place to start. I feel like I'm very happy, and today's conversation with you, I'll be honest, has actually been on a personal level. It's been something that's been in the works internally for a number of years. Very few people know my true full story with what's happened. And it just felt like the right time now to share my story with the world and finally put some closure to this whole experience, and just to give myself just to bury this once and for all. I'll never forget the things that have happened, but it's no longer been in a negative. It's no longer affecting me in a negative way. I've now channeled that experience into a motivator, and it motivates me to work as hard as I do to bring the most value that I can bring to all of my clients, but also to treat every single individual, whether it's a client or non-client, with the utmost respect. Also treating them with the most honesty when it comes to their investment endeavors, whether it's on the finance or real estate side. I like to treat people the way I want to be treated. And I also now, the way I treat my clients' money, I treat it as if it's my own money. So if I'm buying something, if I'm not willing to pay a price for that, if I'm not willing to pay the price tag for a home, I'm going to tell my clients that. I'm not afraid to tell them that I would not go past that price. if it's an investment or a mortgage or anything, it's the same thing. If I personally wouldn't be able to do it, meaning like if I personally don't believe in the opportunity or believe the value in it, I will relay the information to the client so that they have the transparency of where I feel. Now, the decision will ultimately lie in the clients, but I will always share my personal perspective so that that individual can make the best possible decision with my thoughts in mind. As a professional, we just see things a little differently, right? And we earn our money by being unemotional in an otherwise emotional decision-making process. So I do my very best to bring those values forward. And really, I feel like I have this obligation, this duty. I have to be doing what I'm doing because there are so many predators that are out there. And we don't need to name any of them. The media does a pretty good job, exposing these particular individuals for some of the malicious things that they do. But one of the things that I will absolutely always stand, it's almost like my code of honor or my moral obligation is to protect consumers from predators that are out there. And a platform like yours, Andrea, gives me that opportunity to share my story so that consumers that are considering investing or doing certain things hopefully can learn from this experience to be able to take away, lessons that they can apply to their own endeavors, their goals, so that they can avoid some of the pitfalls that I may have experienced. So that's mindset where I am. In terms of where we are today, I'm really proud to say that I'm still operating in the real estate business. I've now joined a global luxury real estate firm known as Engel & Volkers Toronto. We're located at Yonge and King, right downtown Toronto, in the financial district. And my wife and I have been consistently regarded among the top 0.5% of real estate professionals for transaction volume in the Greater Toronto area with the Toronto Real Estate Board, going back now since 2019, 2020. Since 2017, my wife has been licensed with me, and together we've been regarded among the top producers in the city. Last year, we were in the top 2% of all Royal LePage in Canada. And so we've now transitioned to join this luxury brokerage. We have our mortgage and finance team, which is growing. We have, and we're seeing a lot of opportunities, not only with assisting clients that are right now looking to purchase, but we've also been helping a lot of individuals, especially a little bit older, who are going through some struggles financially. We've been doing a lot of refinancing to help individuals understand exactly what's the best situation for them. As a value-added service, by combining our two, our integrated divisions, we're also very supportive with helping consumers that are in the process of transition, whether it's a move up or a move down. We've been able to help, a family, an elderly couple that's retired, they were selling a home and they were unsure if the proceeds were going to help them get into the next place. In real time, our integrated team was not only able to take the offer that they were provided with, that we received, we were able to calculate what the net worth was, what the net proceeds would be, run a quick calculation or scenario builder to see what would they potentially qualify for the next move. And we were able to identify a great opportunity that allowed them to make that move, accept the offer that was on the table because it was decent, a little below their expectations, but the numbers worked. And that was what was important for them. And we were able to make that transition work really well for them. We actually, one of my mortgage partners and I met with them over the weekend at their housewarming.
Oh, nice.
And, yeah. And you want to know, when a client says to you, "We love you guys, you're like family," that is the greatest reward that you can ever receive, right? I mean, we get compensated extremely well for the work that we do and the services that we provide, but the money means nothing if you're not getting that kind of feedback from your clients. It means you're doing something really well and we're doing the right things. And that's, to me, the biggest reward.
That is the power of, I think, and summarizes so well this entire conversation, because what I actually got from you, from everything that you've said, is that you operate based on that human connection and doing it with ethics, first of all, which is so important in trusting a financial professional. And you learned your ethics the hard way, which I think anybody who's been through something similar can resonate with. But also, we are all just individuals trying to connect with other individuals at the end of the day and wanting to help each other. And that being at the core of what we are, what we do every day, but who we are resonates with people. And I think that's why that is so important to you, because you're just another wonderful human looking to connect and assist other wonderful humans out there. So thank you.
Appreciate that. Likewise.
Well, this is, what are we all here for other than to just share with each other and grow together? I honestly believe that.
Absolutely.
As our purpose is to just, we're all connected, all the strings are connected. So, Elias, I just want to say, thank you for sharing what a vulnerable and beautiful story that you have shared with everybody today. I know it took a lot for you to get to this point to share this with everybody. And I hope that this was cathartic for you and was everything that you were hoping to get out there to the world. I'll put Elias's information in the show notes. So if anybody wants to reach out to Elias and his team to connect with them further, we'll have that information available. Last words, I'll leave over to you, Elias.
Andrea, I just wanted to thank you sincerely for inviting me onto your podcast. It's been a pleasure to connect with you and to share this story. And like I said, like we said earlier, honestly, for me, this moment has been years in the making. It's something that, honestly, it feels like a huge weight off of my shoulders. It's something that I kept with me for many years. Just just the shame and embarrassment, I guess, is, the way that that's how I categorize it or describe it. But I think just timing wise, it was the right time for us to be able to kind of put some closure here. But more importantly was really having the opportunity to share this story with the world so that any consumer that's thinking of getting into any investment or entrepreneurial venture, I just really hope that this message will help with, framing at least the right mindset when you're getting into something. I definitely don't want to scare any people from doing these types of endeavors because there's so much potential and opportunity that's out there. But that being said, do so with the right intention and the best intention, but protect yourself by asking the right questions and getting the right stakeholders on your team, which are the advisors, the legal professionals, whether it's lawyer, mortgage, real estate, financial advisor. Get these experts on your side who can give you the right information and insight so you can make the best decision for yourself. And don't rush in. Take your time to make it happen. Treat it as a marathon and not a sprint. That's the most important thing. And Andrea, again, I wanted to sincerely thank you for the opportunity to connect and to collaborate and to be able to share this story, to share my story with the world and with you.
Well, thank you again. Thank you, Elias, and appreciate your time today. And thank you, everyone, for listening. All the best.